All right, today we are peeling back the skin on White Zombie, a band that just crashed into the 90s metal scene like a monster truck full of heavy riffs, B-movie horror, and some serious psychedelic sleaze.
Back in the mid-90s, White Zombie wasn't just another band. They were a full-on spectacle. Their live shows were absolutely legendary, just this chaotic sensory overload. And if you talk to anyone who saw them on that tour with Pantera, well, they'll tell you it was a force of nature, just unforgettable.
But here's the crazy part. The band that was dominating arenas with these massive, groovy metal anthems, that's not how they started out. Not even close. So how in the world did they get from A to B? Well, to figure that out, we've got to go way back to the beginning. Okay, so let's start where most people probably jumped on board. At the absolute peak of their fame. We're talking about an era defined by one monstrously successful album that basically launched them from the grimy underground right into the stratosphere. 2 million. That's how many copies their 1995 album, Astro-Creep 2000, sold in the US alone. I mean, it smashed into the top 10 on the Billboard charts. This album cemented them as absolute, undisputed metal royalty. And the critics totally got it. This quote from Kerrang just nails it. The album was like a perfect storm of 90s culture. It had that signature blend of heavy groove metal, industrial noise, and all those weird psychedelic B-movie samples. This was the sound that made them famous. But again, this polished, incredibly powerful sound, this isn't where their story begins. No, their story started in a completely different and honestly a much grittier scene.
So let's rewind the tape. We're going back to the mid-'80s, to the raw, unfiltered, creative energy of New York City's Lower East Side, a totally different world.
The band was formed by two art students, Rob Cummings, who of course would become Rob Zombie, and the incredible Sean Yeazelt. Their early years were pure, gritty DIY. I mean, Sean has said they recorded their first single in just 2 hours for $30. 30! This was not a band aiming for the pop charts. They were a product of the city's confrontational avant-garde art scene. And this part is absolutely key. They weren't a metal band yet. They were part of what was called the no-wave scene. It was all about rejecting commercial music, experimenting with pure noise and dissonance. Think less Metallica and more confrontational artistic bands like the Swans or Black Flag. So what happened? That's the big question, right? How does an experimental art school noise project morph into the groove metal titans that ended up conquering MTV? Well, it was a pretty deliberate evolution, not some kind of accident. According to Sean Yeazelt, their drummer Yvonne DePrume was a huge metalhead. He just blast bands like Metallica in the tour van nonstop. And, that influence started to seep in. Rob's vision was to take that metal power and fuse it with the tribal grooves they already loved. The final piece of the puzzle was guitarist Jay Uginger, who was this perfect bridge. He could shred wild noise, but also lock into these super tight, heavy riffs. And all of this, all these different pieces, they finally came together on their 1992 major label debut. This album right here, this was the turning point. This is where the iconic White Zombie sound was really forged for the very first time. I mean, just look at this. This is their secret sauce in action. They took those heavy, groovy riffs and then just layered them with this dense collage of audio clips from their favorite B-movies, grindhouse trailers, and old cult horror films. It was heavy, you could dance to it, and it was totally cinematic. But here's the thing, success was not instant. The album was a total slow burn. It took over a year just to even show up on the Billboard 200 chart. But they toured relentlessly, and Thunder Kiss 65 got into heavy rotation on MTV, especially after it got the seal of approval from Beavis and Butthead. After that, it just kept selling, and eventually went double platinum. So that massive, slow-building success led them right back to where we started, their commercial peak in 1995, which was, ironically enough, also the beginning of the end. Astro-Creep 2000 was and still is a masterpiece of 90s metal. It was led by that massive hit single, More Human Than Human, and on this album they just perfected their sound. They dialed up all the industrial and electronic textures, and it really was the ultimate distillation of every influence they'd absorbed over the past decade. But behind that huge public triumph, there was some serious private turmoil. The recording process was reportedly just grueling and dysfunctional. Rob started insisting that the band write riffs over pre-made electronic beats, which was a huge and pretty unwelcome change to their whole process. It got to the point where, on their biggest tour ever, he was riding in a completely separate bus from the rest of the band. So ultimately, Rob Zombie made a choice. He decided to end the band right at their absolute peak. Rather than let all the internal problems cause them to fizzle out with a weaker album, he just pulled the plug in 1998, only a few years after their biggest success ever.
But even though the band was officially dead and buried, its influence was far from over. And really, its key members were just getting started on their next X.
Rob Zombie, of course, went on to launch a massively successful solo career that basically just continued that industrial groove sound of Astro-Creep. But then he also reinvented himself as this celebrated horror film director, bringing all those B-movie obsessions to the big screen with movies like House of 1000 Corpses. And bassist Sean Usaltz also kept making music while becoming a really successful photographer and designer. And, that's their true legacy right there. When you boil it all down, they took the weird, the experimental, the chaotic energy of the New York art punk scene and injected it directly into mainstream metal. They proved that heavy music could be smart and strange and just wildly fun all at the same time. Which kind of leaves us with one final thought, right? In today's music world, which is so much more streamlined and algorithm-driven, could a band that took such a strange, decade-long journey from noise rock to stadium metal actually break through? It really makes you wonder.